The ferry from Rivière du Loup ran twice a day in October, and she had taken the morning one, which meant she arrived on the south shore before noon, with the light still high and flat, and the wind off the river cutting through the wool of her coat like it had a reason to. The town of Saint-Clair-Duba sat at the edge of a plateau where the land stopped deciding what it wanted to be. Below it, the river. Above it, the back country, spruce and rock and silence in that order. The main street was 4 blocks and ended at a feed store whose sign had lost 2 letters and no one had replaced them. A post office. A hardware that doubled as a pharmacy in the way of small towns that have given up pretending those are different things. A hotel with 6 rooms, she would learn, and a dining room that served breakfast until 10 and nothing after. She carried 1 bag. A second was checked through on the mail coach that would arrive Thursday. The woman at the post office counter was sorting parcels and did not look up when she came in. When she did, her expression held the specific neutrality of someone who had learned not to waste curiosity on people who might not stay. She had a letter. She produced it from the inside pocket of her coat and read the name from the envelope, not because she had forgotten it, but because saying it aloud to a stranger felt like a small commitment she wanted to be deliberate about. The woman set down a parcel. She looked at the envelope, then at the bag on the floor beside the door. "He'll be out at the Vaillancourt parcel," she said. "Past the mill road, left at the split rail, follow the smoke." She paused. "He's been putting up a log structure out there since September." She said she would find it. "You'll want boots," the woman said, looking at her feet. She was already wearing boots. The woman nodded once as though revising her assessment and went back to the parcels. Outside, the street was the kind of quiet that means everyone knows something is happening and no one intends to be the one who makes it obvious. A man loading a truck glanced at her, the way men in small towns glance at women arriving alone. Long enough to record, short enough to deny. She followed the directions. The mill road was unpaved and ran between rows of tamarack that had gone the color of old copper in the October light. The split rail fence at the left turn had been mended in 2 places with wire. She noted this without knowing yet why she was noting it. The smoke was visible before the structure was. A thin column rising straight in the still air, which meant the wind had dropped since morning. She walked toward it on a track packed by a truck, going and coming enough times to make 2 ruts in the frost-stiffened ground. He was at the north wall when she came around the stand of balsam that had been hiding the site. He had his back to her and was fitting a log into a notch, working it with both hands, adjusting the angle with the kind of patience that is not performance but simply what the work requires. He wore a canvas jacket. A thermos sat on a sawbuck to his left. She stopped at the edge of the clearing and waited. He heard her before he turned. She could tell because his shoulders registered something a fraction of a second before his head did. He turned and looked at her across the distance of the yard, maybe 20 feet, and she let him look. He was older than she had expected from the letters. Not old, just older. His face had the particular quality of men who spend most of their time outside. Weathered at the edges, clear at the center. He came toward her without hurrying. When he stopped, there were perhaps 4 feet between them. He looked at her the way she had already decided she would be honest with herself about, directly, without the particular performance of a man assessing his investment. "You made good time," he said. "The morning ferry was on schedule," she said. He looked at the bag. He looked back at her. "The truck's around the other side," he said. "I'll put your bag in." He reached for it and she let him take it. She noticed he checked first that she still had her coat, had her hands free, before he lifted anything. They drove back to town in the truck, which was old enough to have a particular smell, oil and cold metal, and something that might have been cedar at one point. And he drove the way she had watched him work, without any excess motion, hands easy on the wheel, making small adjustments to the road without seeming to think about them. The heater had one setting, which was moderate, and the window on her side had a gap at the top that let in a thread of cold air. She noted the gap. She did not mention it. "The house in town needs work," he said after a while. "The one I'm letting. It's decent, but the back room has been cold since I moved in and I haven't found where it's getting in." She said she would have a look. He glanced at her once, not long, and then looked back at the road. The house was on the north end of the main street. set back from the road by a narrow yard, and a spruce tree that had grown too close to the east wall and was pressing against it in a way that was going to be a problem eventually. She saw this before she saw the house. She did not say anything about the spruce. Inside, a front room with a wood stove, 2 chairs, a table, a window facing west, a kitchen behind it, a narrow staircase. The floors were pine, worn in the paths people wore, from door to stove, from stove to table, from table to sink. She could read the life of the place from the floors without being told anything about it. "The room upstairs is yours," he said. "End of the hall. I'm in the one at the front." She went up and stood in the doorway. A single bed, a window facing north that caught no afternoon light, a hook on the wall, and a chest of drawers someone had painted white and then stopped caring about. The room was cold in the particular way of rooms that have been empty long enough to develop their own climate. She set her bag on the bed and came back down. "I'll start supper," she said. It was 4 o'clock and the light outside was already going gold at the edges. He looked at her once, then he'd pulled on his jacket and went out the back to split what she later understood was a week's worth of wood, though the task had not needed doing before she arrived. She found the kitchen in the state of a man who has been cooking only for necessity. Functional, clean enough without any evidence of pleasure in it. A cast iron pan with good seasoning, dried lentils in a jar, half a cabbage in the cold box still firm, potatoes. Salt pork wrapped in paper in the back of the shelf. She made a soup. While it cooked, she walked the kitchen once slowly, not looking for anything in particular, just learning the room. The drawer that stuck, the way the left burner ran hotter, the shelf above the stove where he kept, in this order, matches, a small tin of tobacco he no longer used but had not thrown out, and a photograph turned face down that she did not touch. He came in when the smell reached the back step. She heard him pull off his boots, heard the particular weight of his footfall on the kitchen floor. He washed his hands at the sink. Cold water. He didn't bother with the hot. She noted that this was not negligence but habit. She set 2 bowls on the table and sat across from him. He looked at the soup and then at her briefly and picked up his spoon. They ate without speaking. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the spruce against the east wall. She could hear the branch pressing against the siding, not a scrape exactly, more like a question asked once and then asked again quietly by something that was patient. When he finished, he set the spoon down and looked at the bowl for a moment before looking up. "Good," he said. She didn't answer right away. She was deciding whether to move past it or let it land. She let it land, just for a moment. Then she said, "The left burner runs hot. I'll adjust for it." He nodded as though this were the most natural sentence she could have said, and stood and carried his bowl to the sink and washed it. Both bowls. She noted this without remarking on it. She lay awake in the cold room for a while. That first night, not from worry, but from the newness of the sounds. A house tells you everything about itself in the first few nights if you know how to listen. This one told her. The east wall is the weak point. The stairs have a landing that shifts in the cold. The furnace kicks twice before it catches. She stored these things the way she stored everything, without deciding yet what she would do with them. In the morning, she was up before him. She had the fire going in the wood stove and the kettle on when she heard him on the stairs. The landing shifted. She had expected it. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the stove and then at her and did not say anything about her being up early. He sat at the table and she poured coffee into the cup she had already put out. He wrapped both hands around it and looked at the window. Outside, frost had come overnight. The yard was pale and still, the spruce against the east wall holding a thin coat of it on the upward side of every branch. After a while he said, "I'll be at the Viancourt site most of the day. The chinking on the north wall needs finishing before the cold sets in." She said, "How long before it does?" He considered the window. 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if we get lucky. She picked up her cup. 2 weeks felt like a number she should hold on to. She had always been careful with numbers like that. How long? How far? How much time before something changed? It was not fear. It was arithmetic. The kind she had learned to do in the back of her mind, the way some people check the bolt on a door at night without knowing they were doing it. "I'll look at the back room this morning," she said. "Find where it's getting in." He nodded and stood and carried his cup to the sink. After he left, she went through the house the way she went through things she needed to understand. starting at the outside and working in. She went around the exterior first in the cold morning, running her hand along the foundation where it met the sill, checking the caulking at the window frames. The back bedroom had a window that had been painted shut, and then the paint had cracked at the corner seam where the cold had worked at it. And the gap was maybe the width of a blade of grass, but in the right wind it would pour cold air in like water through a crease. She saw it without any ceremony of discovery. It was simply what it was. She went back inside and found putty in the basement, a tin that had been opened and relidded and was still usable. She worked it into the seam with her thumb, smoothing it flat. It took 15 minutes. She noted the other windows that would need the same attention before December and made a list in the small notebook she kept in her coat pocket. Not a list for anyone, just for herself. He came back at noon and she had soup on again, the lentils finished this time, and bread she had made from a recipe she kept in her head. It had turned out well in this oven, which ran more evenly than the one she had used last, and she was pleased with that without showing it. He sat down and looked at the bread before he looked at anything else. "Found it," she said. He looked up, the window in the back room. Paint had cracked at the corner. "I put putty on it." He was quiet for a moment in the way she was already learning meant he was processing something rather than dismissing it. "I checked the weather stripping," he said. "Last month." It wasn't the weather stripping. He nodded once. He tore off a piece of bread and ate it and said nothing more about the window. That meant she had been right and he knew it, and there was no need to make anything further out of it. She appreciated that. There was a boy who showed up that afternoon. 9 years old, she guessed, or near it, the son of the woman 3 houses down, who had apparently been sending him over to check on the woodpile since November of last year, and saw no reason to stop now that circumstances had changed. His name was Owen, and he arrived at the back door with the particular confidence of a child who has been welcomed somewhere enough times to stop knocking gently. He knocked twice, hard, and stood on the step looking up at her when she opened the door. "Woodpile's fine," he said. "I checked." "I see," she said. He looked past her into the kitchen. "Is there soup?" She gave him a bowl. He sat at the table and ate it without being asked to and talked, in the way children talk when they feel at home, about his teacher and the condition of the ice on the pond, and the fact that his uncle in Trois-Rivières had a snowmobile that went faster than any other snowmobile anyone had ever seen, claimed she accepted without comment. When he was done, he set the bowl in the sink, which surprised her, and went out that back door. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after he left. The room felt different than it had when she arrived. Not bigger, just more used. The days found a shape. She did not plan it. She did not think he did either. But there it was. The coffee before the work, the noon meal when the light was right, the hour in the evening when the day sorted itself out without anyone managing it. He would come in and wash at the sink and sit at the table with whatever correspondence needed doing. She would be at her own work near the window. And the quiet between them was not the quiet of people who have run out of things to say. It was the quiet of people who have not yet started. She noticed things. That was what she did. She noticed the photograph on the shelf above the stove was still turned face down on the 3rd day and the 4th and the 5th. She noticed he took the truck out on Thursday evening and came back 2 hours later and did not say where he'd been. She noticed he sharpened his tools on a stone he kept in a specific spot in the workshop, and that the spot was always exactly the same. The stone in a precise relation to the edge of the bench that suggested long habit or loss or both. She did not ask about any of it. On the 6th day, a woman came to the door. She introduced herself as Marguerite Fleury. She lived on the road east of town. She had heard someone was staying at the house. She brought a jar of pickled beets. She was perhaps 60 and had the particular directness of women who have been managing things alone for long enough to have stopped performing anything they didn't mean. She looked at the kitchen. She looked at the table. She looked at the window where the putty had dried pale against the painted frame. "Fix the draft," she said. The back window was going. She nodded as though this confirmed something she'd already decided. She set the beets on the counter. "He's not a bad man," she said. Not to either of them. Just into the air of the kitchen, the way certain women speak when they are documenting facts for the record. He just got used to not having anyone to talk to. She left before he got back. She put the beets in the cold box. She thought about what Marguerite Fleury had said and decided she agreed with the first part and reserved judgment on the second. On the 8th day, she asked about the photograph. She had not planned to. She had been at the stove and he had been at the table, and the question had simply come up the way questions do when you have been keeping them too long. The photograph, she said. On the shelf. You don't have to say. He looked at the shelf. Then he looked at his hands on the table. My wife, he said. She died 4 years ago. I turned it over because I thought. He stopped. He started again. I didn't know what you would think if you saw it. She took the pan off the heat. I would have thought it was a photograph of someone you loved. He didn't say anything. You can turn it back, she said. He looked at the shelf again. He did not turn it back that evening. But in the morning when she came down, it was facing out. A woman with light eyes and a particular smile, standing in front of a gate somewhere in summer. She looked at it once and went to put the kettle on and didn't say anything about it. There was nothing to say. The shelf had simply been corrected. The cold came in earnest the second week. The kind of cold that makes the house speak at night, timbers contracting, a small, settling sound from the north wall she had learned not to startle at. Owen came by twice, and the second time she let him help her restack the wood in the lean-to by the back door, showing him the way to do it so air could move between the pieces. He was a careful student when shown something practical, and she appreciated this about him. My dad stacks it like that too, he said. It's the right way, she said. He seemed satisfied by this. One afternoon she drove out to the Vaillancourt site, with the lunch he'd forgotten on the counter. She had not meant to stay. But she stood at the edge of the clearing for a moment, watching him work the chinking into the seam between two logs, pressing it in with a tool she didn't have a name for, working by feel as much as sight. The north wall was almost done. In the flat October light, the logs had the color of something old and reliable. She could see what it was going to be. He heard her and turned. You left this, she said, and held up the bag. He came over and took it and set it on the sawbuck, and then turned back to look at what he was building. Not inviting her to look exactly, just not preventing it. She walked along the south wall to the corner and ran her thumb along a joint where two logs met at a precise angle. The fit was very close. There was something in it that was almost musical, the way things are when they've been done correctly. How do you get it that tight? She said. He looked at the corner from where he stood. You cut long and take off a little at a time, he said. Most people rush the last pass. She looked at the joint a moment longer and then went back to her side of the clearing and let him eat his lunch. On the drive back to town, she thought about what most people do. She thought about the last pass. She had her own version of that. The place where she had always given up a little early, moved on before the fit was right, because something in her had learned to expect the gap. She thought about that, and then she thought about something else, and by the time she got back to the house, she had stopped thinking about it directly. But it stayed in the room with her, the way certain things do, not demanding anything, just present. The second bag arrived on Thursday as expected. She brought it up to the room and unpacked it slowly, the way she unpacked in places she was not certain about, keeping things available rather than put away. But she had brought a small thing wrapped in cloth, a ceramic figure her grandmother had given her, the kind of object that is not beautiful exactly, but has the weight of years in it, and she set it on the chest of drawers by the window. She stepped back and looked at it. It was the first thing she had placed in the room that was hers and not the room's. She went downstairs and started supper. He noticed it the next day, the ceramic figure, because he had a reason to go upstairs, and she heard him stop in the hall outside her open door. She was in the kitchen. He didn't say anything when he came back down. But at supper that evening he said, "The room in the corner, downstairs." He paused. "It's got better light in the mornings if you wanted a place to do your work." She looked up from her bowl. "The north-facing window up there doesn't get much," he said. "The corner room gets east light until noon." She looked at her bowl again. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded and finished his soup. That evening she put a lamp in the corner room and stood in the doorway watching the light fall across the floor. It was a good room, wide plank floor, window facing east, A second window on the south side. She could see the yard and the lean-to, and past them the back field that ran to the tree line. She stood there long enough for the lamp wick to need adjusting. In the morning, the lamp was still on the floor where she had left it. She picked it up and set it on the old table that was already in the room, pushed against the wall. She looked at the table. She looked at the window. She went to make coffee. He was already in the kitchen when she came down. He had the kettle on, which had not happened before. He looked up. She looked at the kettle. Neither of them said anything about it. She got the cups, and he poured, and they stood at the counter for a moment, with the window showing the frost on the back field, pale and even in the early light. "The chinking will be done today," he said. "If the weather holds," she said. And then he said, "Then it's the roof, but that wants help. My cousin Theodore is coming up from Levis on the weekend." Theodore was a new name. She filed it. "After the roof." He looked at his cup, interior framing, the walls, running the stovepipe. He paused. "It's a few weeks of work yet." She nodded and drank her coffee, and he drank his, and the frost on the field did not move, and the morning was very still. 3 days passed in which the house became more itself. She moved her work things to the corner room without announcing it, just carrying things down, one at a time. The basket, the lamp, the small wooden box she kept her thread and needles in. When he came home the second evening and saw the light on in the corner room, he did not stop or say anything. He went to wash his hands, and she heard the tap and then heard him pause in the hall doorway of the corner room. She was at the table with her mending. He looked at the room for a moment. "Good light," he said. "Very good," she said. He went to the kitchen. Theodore arrived on Saturday morning in a truck that was newer than any vehicle she had yet seen in St. Clair Duba, which she took as a statement of some kind. He was younger, broad across the shoulders, with the particular confidence of a man who has been told he is capable since childhood and has found no reason to doubt it. He shook her hand with both of his, which she noted, and said something in Quebecois French that went faster than she could follow, and then slowed himself and said in English, "He said you were steady." I told him that was the best thing he could say about a person. She said, "I'll take it." He grinned. It was a good grin, without competition in it. They spent 2 days on the roof at the Vaillancourt site. She brought food out both days, and on the second day, Theodore came down from the roof for lunch and sat on an upturned crate and ate with a kind of concentrated attention that meant he was genuinely hungry and did not feel the need to make conversation about it. She appreciated this. At one point, he looked up from his bowl and said, "That front corner, the dovetail. He did that one himself?" "I don't know," she said. "I only saw it finished. You can tell when someone takes their time." He looked at the structure. He always did, slower than anybody I know. But the work holds. She looked at the north wall. Slower than anybody. But the work holds. She thought about that on the drive back to town. She thought about it while she swept the kitchen floor and while she stood at the window, watching the field go gray in the early dark. She was not in the habit of thinking about people directly. She came at things sideways, let them settle, waited for them to resolve into something she could name. But that particular phrase had not resolved. It had only gotten quieter and more present, the way things do when they are true. On Tuesday, Theodore left. He shook her hand again with both of his and told her the beet soup had been the best thing he'd eaten in a month, which she suspected was not strictly accurate but accepted in the spirit it was offered. After his truck cleared the end of the road, the house was quieter than it had been. Not empty, just returned to itself. That evening he sat at the table longer than usual. She was in the corner room, but she could hear him, the particular quality of stillness a person makes when they are not doing anything, but are also not ready to stop being where they are. She came to the kitchen doorway. He looked up. "Theodore said you take your time," she said, "on the dovetails." He looked at the table. "He said that?" "He meant it well. I know he did." He turned his cup in his hands. "My father always said I was too slow, that I overthought it." A pause. He wasn't wrong, exactly. She leaned against the doorframe. "The corner was clean," she said. He looked up at her. "The front corner. I ran my thumb along it." She said it the way she would report a measurement. There was no gap. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at the table. "The Beaumont parcel," he said, "on the east end of the county. Old man Beaumont died in the spring. His daughter wants a place built on it before she comes up in May. A pause. The foundation's already poured, its framing and everything after. She waited. It's a bigger job, he said. Takes 2 people through most of it. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the corner room, the light still on, the lamp casting its rectangle on the floor. She thought about the joint that holds, about the last pass and what it costs to not rush it. Tell me about the foundation, she said. He looked up. He moved the cup to the side and reached for the paper he'd been keeping his notes on. He turned it so she could read it from the doorway. She came and sat across from him. She looked at the drawing. The proportions were good. He had written the measurements in a hand that was careful and exact, the handwriting of a man who understood that numbers written wrong become problems that are very hard to fix. The east wall gets morning light, he said, tapping a line on the drawing. I'd put the larger window there, she said. He looked at the line. He picked up the pencil and marked it. She looked at the rest of the drawing. She pointed to a spot near the back. What's this room for? Storage, he said. Or a nursery. Hasn't been decided, she nodded. They worked through the drawing for a while, not talking about anything except what the drawing needed. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the spruce against the east wall. The branch had been cut back last week. She had not asked him to do it. She had only mentioned once that the spruce was pressing on the siding. The next morning it was done. After a while, she sat back. All right, she said. I'll need to know the lumber situation before we start. He looked at her across the table. There was something in his face she did not try to name, something that had been there for a while and had simply gotten less careful about being visible. I'll call the yard in the morning, he said. She nodded and stood and went to the sink and rinsed her cup. He stayed at the table with the drawing. She heard his pencil moving as she went up the stairs. The landing shifted as it always did. She went to her room and stood at the north window for a moment. The frost was already coming in on the edges of the glass. The yard below was dark, except for the lean-to light, which he always left on. She had not asked about that either. She had only noticed that it was there every night, that particular square of yellow at the edge of the dark, and that she had stopped noticing it because it had simply become part of what she expected. That was how it worked. Not all at once, not with anything said. Just the expected things, arriving in the right order, until you could not quite remember what it had felt like before they were there. In the morning, the coffee was made, and she did not know which of them had gotten up first.